Hello everybody and welcome along to today's video, where today I'm sure this is going to be a hotly debated topic that I'm going to talk about, but over the last couple of weeks I've been reading a lot on, a few thoughts on Twitter about people's different thoughts on where we are at the state of New Who, of New Doctor Who at the moment. How many more series are left? Are we closer to the end of this stint of Doctor Who, because it will inevitably end at some point, or have we still got many more years to go? So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to just have a little look at both sides of the argument, see past history in the past, what that can indicate for the future, and also look at what's happening at the moment, and if we can just try and have an idea of just how much longer Doctor Who's going to go on for. So of course we hear the comments from time to time, Doctor Who's dead, it's terrible now, it was all only good back in the David Tennant days, I haven't watched it since 2010, I hate the current Doctor, Peter Capaldi, he's too grumpy and old for the programme. All these fairly silly criticisms of the show, if we're being honest. But there probably is some truth, or at least it could lead to some problems, these criticisms, because one of the biggest things you look at it is viewing figures in Doctor Who. At least in the UK, the viewing figures are significantly down on where they were a few years ago, before the Capaldi era is the best way of looking at it. Realistically, if you look at, of course I do take into account BBC iPlayer, more people watch on catch-up, people don't watch live, so overnights are down, and I get all of that. I work in TV, I really do understand how viewing figures work. But the clearest fact of it is that from Series 8 to Series 9, over 1 million people stopped watching Doctor Who. The viewing figures, in consolidated figures with all iPlayer and everything else, were down more than 1 million across the series. So how did Doctor Who lose 1 million viewers between two series? Was it the Capaldi Doctor? Or was it something more than that? It's really hard to tell, because even from the Matt Smith era it was starting to dwindle. Clearly it peaked in the David Tennant era, and I think it will be the peak for New Who, that's just it. I don't think Doctor Who will, at least in this current run, will reach a peak as high as it did in the David Tennant era, where it was he was a national treasure. The show was completely in the public consciousness. Everybody knew about Doctor Who. So the Series 4 or Series 3, Series 4 certainly, so many people were watching it. Everybody was aware of it. It wasn't a show that was frowned upon as nerdy or anything. It was mainstream drama that was hugely popular, and that unfortunately has just massively fallen away these last few years. Now I don't want this to be a video where I bash Doctor Who, because I'm not bashing Doctor Who. Anybody who watches my videos, you know I love the Capaldi era. I think it's been a fantastic 3 series. He's been the best Doctor in my opinion. But I have to confess that to the general public, he probably hasn't been. And he hasn't been as popular a Doctor. The writing in the general public opinion has not been as good, even if I may disagree at times. But that, you just have to look at that, the general popularity of the show dwindling in this stage. And I mean, you look at it as Doctor Who took a year off as well, from Series 9 to Series 10. There was no Doctor Who for, well, there was a Christmas special or two in 18 months, basically. And then we came back with the pilot, where they tried to build it up as it's a fresh start for Doctor Who. We've got a new companion. We're going to call it the pilot because it's the start of a new series. We're all fresh and ready to go again. And the viewing figures were still the same, still not very good. The overnights were 4.5 million, I think, and the consolidated figures were around 6.5. When you compare that to the David Tennant era, consolidated figures were consistently 8, 9, 10 million. Even some of the finales, some of the biggest episodes even got towards 11, 12 million. I know that doesn't happen on a lot of TV shows, but it is possible. You look at something like Broadchurch from last year, that was getting consistently 10 million views a week across the whole series, and even, obviously it's completely unrelated to Doctor Who, but programmes like Blue Planet 2, that got like 13, 14 million people watching last year. So it is possible to make a TV show that is that popular, but is it possible to make Doctor Who that's that popular anymore? I don't think so. So where does that leave us at the moment? Well, we know for sure that Series 11 obviously is filming, so that's absolutely fine, and Series 12 has been commissioned by the BBC, clear 100%, that's definitely happening. Some press releases have hinted that there's a 5-year plan for Chris Chibnall's run in Doctor Who. When that started, we don't really know, it's not very clear. I personally think that might have started in 2016 when he was announced. At the moment, I would look at it as we're going to get a Series 11 in autumn 2018, a Series 12 optimistically in autumn 2019, and very optimistically a Series 13 in autumn 2020, with Chibnall potentially bowing out then. I really would be very surprised if he does as many series as Moffat. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he only does 3 series, with Jodie Whittaker doing 3 series, and then they both hop it off and go after that. Keep a tight-knitted, sort of maybe hopefully grow the show again, and just have a tight-knitted period, and then that's it, and sort of give up at that point. It wouldn't surprise me at all, but there is this mysterious 5-year plan in place, so they have at least got some sort of longer-term planning, but whether that's until 2020 or 2023 or wherever, it's very hard to tell at this stage. So it's going to be an interesting next few years, I think. I mean, I think I've said it before in some of my videos that I do think that Series 11 is probably the most important series of Doctor Who since it came back in 2005. I feel this series could make or break the next few years of the show. If it's a disaster, if Jodie Whittaker as a female Doctor doesn't really work, she's not that popular, the viewing figures are dropping more, then I really don't see how Doctor Who's going to hang around for too much longer. I think it'll be gone in 3-4 years, and it'll be back on a hiatus, aka off, cancelled for the time being, because as much as the BBC do want to promote the show, and it is a popular show still, and it does make them lots of money, there becomes a point where the viewing figures just get too low and it just becomes too unpopular a show that it's just not sort of justified for the BBC to keep pumping money into it. Because as much as they talk about the budgets being a little bit tight, Doctor Who is not a cheap programme to make. It's because the BBC don't have any money like Netflix have money. If Doctor Who went to Netflix, they could chuck ridiculous amounts of money and it would look a lot better, but it wouldn't feel the same if it's chucked on Netflix. So personally I hope that sort of thing doesn't happen to the show. But it is still a big sort of cost to the BBC, and they can't afford to keep pumping lots of money into that if it isn't sort of bringing that money back in merchandising and selling it abroad and everything like that. If that's not happening, why would they keep doing it? So that's why I really do feel that Series 11 has got to be a success. Viewing figures do need to rise a little bit. It's got to be generally well received by critics. The 13th Doctor needs to be more likeable and more easy to get on with straight away, which I think was one of the biggest issues with the Capaldi Doctor, was that he was such a change, such a darker Doctor, such a more serious and much more difficult to get on with Doctor early on, that for some people who are maybe more casual fans, they just thought, this isn't worth it, I can't be bothered to try and learn to like this Doctor, I'm just going to give up here. I enjoyed the last 7 years, I enjoyed Matt Smith, David Tennant was amazing, and that, but hey, I'm growing up now, it's not for me. And I think that is probably a sort of element of why the figures and everything has dropped so much over the Capaldi era. I mean, there's been no merchandising compared to previous eras as well. There's been a lot less in terms of sort of action figures and just general merchandise you see in shops relating to Doctor Who. There's been so little of it for the Capaldi era. I think it's just slipped from sort of public sort of acceptance and being that mainstream that it just isn't anymore. And I think that's the other big thing that it probably won't ever get back, at least in this run of the show, is the mainstream element of it. Doctor Who, as I've already said, was peak completely mainstream drama in 2008, 2007, right through to the end of the David Tennant era. And I think even Series 5, maybe Series 6 as well, of Doctor Who, and certainly around the 50th anniversary, it was all very popular and mainstream. You look at the figures of Day of the Doctor, it was amazing, but that's because of the anniversary of it. But I think since then, through the Capaldi era, some of the fault probably can go to the writing, in that it's been too insular, it's been too self-referential, they've looking too much back into the continuity of the programme, and making it at times more difficult for casual fans to sort of get into and enjoy. I mean, as much as I love the Series 9 opener, it was clearly a mistake to have an episode that strongly links to a Tom Baker story, and including massive amounts of references and classic Daleks and all that kind of thing, as an opener to a series to entice people into the show. That, unfortunately, isn't a good way of bringing in new viewers. So I think that was a mistake to start off with, as much as I love it as a story. And it's just gradually more and more dropped away from the public consciousness, and it does feel like I have a nerdy interest now by being a fan of Doctor Who. People give a bit more of a sort of smirk and a slight laugh at you depending on who you talk to about your interest in Doctor Who, whereas 10 years ago they've also been a massive fan of Doctor Who, and they'd love to chat to you about the latest David Tennant Doctor Who episode from Series 3, 2, 3, 4, whatever. I'm sure they probably would have watched it as well, whereas now you just get that sense that people have that thought again, that sort of it developed in the later period of classic Who, that it is a nerdy sci-fi show that's sort of, it's not drama, it's not for me, I'm not a nerd, I'm not a big science fiction fan, it's not for me anymore. I sense is the way people are going about it, and that's something that's very, very hard to break once it slips away from sort of mainstream media and becomes a slightly more niche show that's thought of as a little bit more nerdy, that's very difficult to get out of again. I think it's a massive challenge. It really is a massive challenge for Chris Chibnall to try and wrestle the popularity of the show back. I mean, I think if anybody's going to do it, he is going to do it. You look at Broadchurch, it's been a massive national success with some of the best viewing figures you've seen on TV in a long time. So I think it's definitely possible, but it's going to be such a challenge for him. And so I think one of the clearest ways of putting it is I think we are closer to the end of New Who than we are the beginning. We're 13 years near enough now into this stint of Doctor Who, and although Classic Who lasted 26 years, I would be very, very surprised if in 2031 we're still continuing with series, we're on series 26 or series 22 of Doctor Who or whatever it is by then. That really would be a surprise to me. I think we'll get a good few more series. I would certainly, series 11, 12, we'll get series 13, I'm sure of that. But past that, I think a lot of it's just going to depend on the popularity of the show. Where it goes from here, whether it goes back into the mainstream or shifts away even further with a female Doctor. It's really hard to judge how big this sort of base of people who are vocally hating on the female Doctor and like, I'm never going to watch Doctor Who again. It's very hard to tell exactly how big that sort of section of the fandom is, and how much of an impact that will have on viewership of what people think of it and everything. I think that's going to be very interesting, and it'll be more important about how many more sort of people are picked up by the fact there's a female Doctor and choose to sort of watch the show because it is something completely new. It is a female Doctor for the first time. Hopefully it will have that impact and will maybe gain 1 million viewers just from people more interested in seeing what's that like. But the key will be keeping that through the series and really building up that audience once again that's just slipped so much from the Capaldi era. So overall, I'm not too sure as to the future of Doctor Who. I know that's not very good at answering the question I sort of set out for this video, but it's just so very, very hard to tell. I think the clear things are that the viewing figures are a lot worse than they used to be. Doctor Who is less popular, is not a mainstream show and is a lot less popular than it used to be, at least in the UK. Certainly worldwide, it feels like it's grown a lot more and it's a lot popular across the globe, which should hopefully help it continue for a bit longer, even if the figures and it's not that popular in the UK, because worldwide popularity, that means selling it to countries abroad selling all the merchandise. That's dosh with the BBC and they're going to be happy about that. So that should help, but it's just not a popular show in the way it was in the David Tennant era, in the early Matt Smith era, unfortunately. I think it's going to be very, very, very hard to bring that back again. But I don't think that Chris Chibnall will be the final showrunner of new Doctor Who, as I've seen some people saying. I do think that he'll do 3 or 4 series and then move on and someone else will come in. I have absolutely no idea who it is, and it seems to be one of the most horrible jobs. As much as it's a dream job, it's also a horrible job in television because it's just so much horrendous work and you get constant abuse no matter what you do, because people will hate it and people have very strong opinions, unfortunately. Or, for them, unfortunately at least, that means that they will get a lot of abuse, hence why Stephen Moffat gave up on Twitter, because he was getting abuse for it and everything, it just wasn't worth it. So, but yeah, it's certainly not a sort of enviable job, and I think that made it a bit difficult, and was why Moffat stayed on, because they just couldn't get anybody else when they wanted them, and Chris wasn't available, and obviously to do a series until 2018. Which ended up the year gap and everything, but I've covered that in the past. So I do think there'll be another showrunner, and I don't think Chris will want to stick it out for many, many years. But I do have faith that he will do a good job with the show. But I do think that 2018 could be a decisive year in the future of Doctor Who. And now over to you guys. What do you think about the future of the show? Are we nearing cancellation? It's going to be the end. Doctor Who is dead. It's the end of Doctor Who. This is it. Or do you think it's going to thrive for many more years? Or do you think it's going to be somewhere in the middle? Do you think Series 11 is going to be a popular success? Or do you think it's going to just stay the same as it is at the moment, which I must confess is my feelings. The sort of average viewing figures have been 5-6 million for Series 9 and Series 10. And I just can't see it suddenly going skyrocketing to 8 million on Jodie's first episode. I just don't see that happening personally. But I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think about the future of the show? So a fairly serious and slightly negative video today, shall we say, but hopefully I'll come back with some more positive videos in the future. So do remember to hit the like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for another video. Goodbye.